Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Today, we'll be talking with John Hill, founder and CEO of Silico AI, about business simulation and how digital twins can help streamline process improvement efforts. Welcome, John.
Thanks, Michael. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, I'm glad that you're here. So you do a lot of stuff here with these digital twins and business simulation, but I want to ask you a little bit more, maybe in your introduction, how you transform from being an economist to developing an AI-powered business simulation platform.
Yeah. It's been an interesting journey. So as you alluded to, my first life was as a public sector economist in the UK. I was working on banking system reform and regulation and sort of advanced modeling as an economist, looking at the UK banking system. And I got interested in ideas around complex systems and how we can design them, how we can intervene in them, how we can manage them better to behave how we want them to. So how do we make a system do more of good things and less of bad things, basically? Published some academic work in the space, and then the interest took me out into computer science and into early stage technology companies. And eventually, having spent some time in the simulation space, that was an analytical methodology that really kind of grabbed me, this idea of building a simulation of one of these complex systems and studying it and poking and prodding it and experimenting in it computationally was an idea that just grabbed me and eventually led to me founding Silico with my co-founder Chris in 2019.
Fantastic. Well, we're going to talk a lot more about that today. So, many folks, they're aware of process mining tools. In fact, we've done an episode here on Transfer Now specifically about process mining and that technology. And, process mining tools generally have some simulation capabilities. So how is building a digital twin, different than that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So a lot of the process mining vendors talk a little bit about simulation and they have a simulation capability. I think what, the word simulation means different things to different people. So this is probably my chance to kind of lay down on the record what I mean when I talk about simulation. So those vendors are really talking about some quite simple statistical analysis. So, very crudely, I have some process metrics, have some statistical relationships between the inputs and the outputs to that process that I've learned. So, for example, if I put 20% more orders through a process, I'm going to get somewhere roughly like, 20% increase in processing time or something of that order. I think about simulation very differently. I think about simulation as the science of describing a system and how it changes through time. So the mathematics of how it evolves through time. So when I think about simulation, I need to have an understanding of the causal dependencies, what affects what in the system that we're trying to study, and then how it changes temporally as well. So how that system evolves over time. So instead of being a quite simple black box statistical analysis, what we build are rich, sophisticated models which describe the evolution of the system and the numbers that flow through it over time. That's what I mean by a simulation model. A digital twin then is when we bring that to life. So we connect that, we have a living view of the system that we're trying to study. In this case, obviously, we're talking about processes. So I have an up-to-date view of the structure, the process map, the process diagram, and I have an up-to-date view of the numbers that are flowing through that system, the processing times, the branching factors, the case volumes arriving in the process at each time step. When you have one of these, digital twins, it opens up some really interesting analyses. And there are some analyses that our customers want to do and that what we see as the future of process simulation, the direction we're trying to take this concept in, that you need to have a powerful, flexible tool to be able to unlock those capabilities and those analyses. And again, where the vendors, the process mining vendors are coming from isn't sufficiently flexible to let you kind of get a handle on those analyses. So I think of that as being basically three big things that a platform like Silico lets you do that you wouldn't be able to do with one of these more, simpler statistical analyses type of simulation tools. So the first thing that we do, which is really important for customers, is we let you continue to think beyond just the definition of the process itself. So in process mining, you've learned from data this structure of a process. In our simulation framework, we can continue to build on additional model, additional mathematics, which means we can go beyond just the process. We can go all the way into the business metrics that you care about. So it could be a financial model, some financial modeling attached to an order management process. This could be some net promoter score modeling attached to a customer-facing process. When we speak to manufacturers, a really hot topic right now is ESG and carbon modeling and things like that. So connecting that to a manufacturing process, that's really key. If you're trying to think about how do I change this process? How do I change the behavior of this system? I really want to measure its impact on the metrics that I care about and that the business cares about. So that's like the first really important thing you need to be able to do, go all the way through to the business metrics we're trying to make decisions on the basis of. The second thing then is what you'd classically think of as simulation. What happens if any of the numbers anywhere in this system change, anywhere in the process? So what if case volumes are 10% higher next year? How does the process perform? How do all the metrics evolve under that scenario? And then the third class of thing is to be able to actually change the structure of the process and evaluate changes to the structured process. So I might be looking at the numbers generated by my process as it is today. And what I want to be able to do is compare that to a hypothetical 2B version of that process that I'm trying to move to tomorrow, maybe as a result of some transformation initiative or some automation initiative. And then I want to be able to compare those two things on the basis of those business metrics I care about. So once you have a platform that lets you do these three things, gives you these sort of degrees of freedom, this flexibility, you can start to answer these rich questions like, if we get 10% more cases next year than we've seen historically, which of the to-be process variants that I'm trying to decide between is the optimal one to implement and is the optimal transformation route for the organization to take?
So one of the questions I had you as you're talking about the concept of identifying, but using metrics and optimizing for those metrics, how can an organization choose the right metrics that need to be optimized simply by developing a digital twin?
Yeah. So, something that we learned early on from our customers was, I think a lot of the status quo thinking in transformation has been around the sort of the intermediate metrics, the process metrics themselves, the throughput rates and the delivery times and the cost. And actually, to really have an impact on the business, there were other stakeholders who were key to the transformation initiatives getting off the ground and sort of having life breathed into them. And what they cared about were different things. So they were, a CFO caring about what the impact on the P&L was going to be over a 5-year period. It was how does this impact our customers ultimately? And those two things, I think, probably when we think about what we're actually trying to do in transformation we're trying to build more financially efficient organizations and we're trying to make our customers happy. And so, where I think the digital twin really comes into its own is connecting this world of sort of process insights and the sort of transformation initiatives that we might be able to consider to the outcomes that as a business we're ultimately trying to drive. And I think that's the next frontier for transformation, is to really be able to become a strategic capability for an organization to move the needle on the metrics which the C-suite and the leadership of an organization really care about.
So when you look at that complex interplay between some of the processes, the systems, these metrics, it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts as part of these things, these overall ecosystems that happen within an organization. How can you effectively model these very complex interrelationships between systems and processes and the outcomes that you're looking for?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I guess it comes back to almost how I got into this whole space, right? What we are working with inside organizations are complex systems with lots and lots of moving parts, and making decisions based on partial views and rule of thumbs in those systems is what's dominant today. But there are actually these methodologies which are out there which can help us manage these systems better. So the way I think about complexity in an organization is the same way a computer scientist thinks about complexity in like a software system. And there are lots of these well-known patterns, ideas that you'll have heard of from computer science. A big one is modularity. So can we break a big complex system down into a set of modules that we can understand as a sort of a manageable piece of the overall system? And then we only really need to think about how those modules fit together to be able to build up that complexity and build, huge complex computational systems that no one individual would be able to have, written or designed from scratch. It's the same way you think about organizational complexity. We need to think about what the modules are and how they fit together. To give you like a more concrete example, this is a little bit abstract. If you think about, a lead to cash process, a very sort of standard process inside, commercial process inside most organizations, you might be able to break that down into its constituent parts. The first level of breaking it down might be you have a lead to order process, everything that happens between leads coming into the organization and an order being placed. And a separate process, which is everything from order received through to delivering product and ultimately billing cash from the customer. The inputs to order to cash are the outputs of lead to order. You can follow your way through the lead to order process. You know how many orders are coming through that process, and that's the start of your orders cash process. And what you see is, as you think about an organization, you can start to glue together these processes which interface with one another. And in that way, you can start really small. You can start from a single process or a piece of a process even, and grow your way up to this bigger concept, this digital twin of an organization, this sort of vision that is out there that Gartner have been talking about for a number of years. And you'd be able to then think about managing the organization as a system, not just as a set of isolated parts, not thinking about the interactions between them.
So when you think about those multiple modules as you start building them out, each one could theoretically have a whole lot of data attached to it and in various systems, and pulling that data in or getting access to that data to be able to consume it, to do the analysis might be a little complex. How do you manage that, identifying the right data to pull and then understanding how to incorporate that into that overall digital twin model?
Yeah. So the way I think about this is, it comes back to, fundamentally, what do I need to be able to simulate a system? I need to know the structure of the system. I need to know what relates to what. And I need to know what the key parameters are that drive the performance of that system over time. So for us, and our technology, one of the big advances that we've been able to piggyback on is the availability of process mining. How many organizations now are starting to gain maturity on their process mining journey? Process mining does exactly those two things. It reveals to me the structure of my process. You get these lovely process diagrams that you learn from your ERP system or whatever you've plugged process mining into. And you extract as well those key parameters. So historically, what have processing times look like? What have case volumes look like? What are the branching factors across that process? So where you've done something like process mining, you've got a ready-made place to start on your simulation journey. And so the beauty is that you can go in and you can build on top of that work you've already done. There's no new data exercise. You've already done all of that work to surface the process mining outputs. And then for our customers, as they want to scale up towards this end-to-end processes or connect things together across the organization, a challenge of process mining is that you need to have the data in very specific formats. You need to have log files, and they need to be high quality for you to be able to do process mining. With a framework like ours, it's a bit more flexible. We can bridge between maybe two isolated pockets where we can do process mining really well. And we know the structure, and we know the parameters, and we can fill in some of the bit in the middle where maybe we've got a process diagram we've drawn or that we've done an exercise to map out, and we can get some of those parameters from other systems. So they might be sat in the CRM, they might be sat in the data lake or somewhere else inside the organization. And as part of our platform, we're building a layer that lets you bring in the data from those different places, from your process mining tools, from your data lake, from your enterprise systems like your CRM, Salesforce, or something like that, and inject those numbers into the right parts of the digital twin.
Gotcha. So process mining and then process simulation can both uncover, I guess, and help model this more streamlined process, but also may unearth some pretty messy issues with the labor that's involved in the processes. I imagine there's more than a few customers who find out that their processes are backlogged due to, skill shortages in critical areas or just folks who are helping out in supporting the backlogs in there. So how can you link these, like a newly modeled process simulation back to the real world using both people and, RPA digital workers? How can you address the pushback from stakeholders involved that may not want to move down that direction if there is a potential to streamline based on the simulated version?
Yeah. I mean, actually what we've almost seen more commonly, I think, is often the inverse of this. Actually, is one real example from a large European telco that we worked with was when they simulated out a process end to end, and they plugged in, they ran these scenarios over what they thought the growth in the demand on the process was going to look like. What they identified was, just as you described, big backlogs building up 1-2 years out into the future because of key shortages of staff in specific parts of that process. So, the simulation is agnostic. This is it doesn't have an agenda, right? This is giving you a robust, scientific, mathematical, fact-based basis for making decisions about how you might change the process. One of the levers you can pull is obviously how many FTE work on that process and where they work on the process. So you might be able to move people from one place to another and actually drive more throughput through a process just simply by moving people around. In some cases, the simulation will reveal that the right solution is to go and actually hire more people. There are other instances where one alternative to human workforce is to bring in the digital workers, to bring in something like RPA into specific parts of the process. And so when you look at the process end to end and you have this holistic view that the digital twin gives you, and you're able to run these scenarios, it gives you this very easy to communicate, very easy to understand scientific rationale for how many and where you need to add workers in that process, and then to make those decisions about what type of workforce do you want to have in different parts of that process. There are always going to be parts of these processes which are going to have highly skilled human workers. There might be parts of the process where we're doing things in the physical world as well in order to deliver, things to customers. But there are also lots of opportunities that are going to be identified through the simulation methodology to bring some robotic workers into the process as well.
I suspect some of that has to do with sort of like the throughput aspect. You model based on throughput of a human worker versus a digital worker. Also the skills required. We need to have people interacting with people. Like you mentioned, they're, physical delivery drivers or whatnot. These are, things that have to happen there. Or you have within your, like you said, order to cash kind of thing, maybe there's a bunch of paperwork processing kind of thing that happens behind the scenes as part of that. And right now you can identify based on human workers versus maybe a digital worker throughput where the more optimal staffing model might look like in the future.
Exactly that, right? And what you get as a direct result is you get the ROI of those two alternatives. So a transformation initiative could be to bring in digital workers to replace human workers. The simulation is just showing you what the impact is on all of the metrics you care about in those two alternative states of what that process looks like. Back to something I said earlier, right? One of the things we let you do is change the structure of a process. That's something that if you're going to introduce automation into a process, you're unlikely to entirely automate the whole piece of a process in one go. There's likely to continue to be a manual processing route through that process. And you're almost introducing like a bypass lane, introducing some sort of automation which skips over that backlog and is moving a fraction of the case volume through that process automatically. And then what you can think about is, what sort of the automation rate am I trying to achieve? What does the ROI look like if that's 50% versus if that's 75%? And that helps you make these more nuanced sort of business case decisions about that introduction of digital workers into a process.
So you mentioned something that I want to kind of piggyback on. So you're right. Most organizations are going to look at a potential new state. So because the current state is X, they've identified their process mining tools. They've talked about it, discussed it, and found a secondary or a to be solution. This is how we want to transform it to be. Process modeling then can put that together. Everyone nods their heads. This is fantastic. We want to do there, but we can't get there tomorrow. So as you mentioned, we're going to break this up into little bits. We're going to take this one module and we're going to do this part of the process, and we're going to transform that, whether that's moving that completely to digital labor or it's doing some other mix behind it, adding new systems in, whatever it is that transforms that part of that module. But the rest of the system, the rest of the processes and the way that it handles behind the scene, they're going to stay the same because we're only addressing the one module. So how do you manage that simulation over time when you have modules that are being updated and your processes and the real world is always in flux, to be able to change or adapt to the new reality, which is the external facing market pressures or market environment, plus the changes that you're imposing on the system or on your processes to start with, so that you keep an updated kind of viewpoint of what this model is actually looking like?
Yeah, it is exactly right. And it's almost, I've talked quite a lot about using simulation for sort of identifying the ways in which you're going to transform. What I haven't talked that much about is obviously what happens next, which is once an organization is on the path to do a transformation, this is the next part of the digital twin story for that organization, is continue to update as you move from your as is to your be, to your to be. As you say, that's not going to be in a big bang. That might be a phased project over a number of years. Having that continuously updated view of that process, so reflecting the process changes as they occur inside the organization and reflecting what's changing in the outside world, the numbers that are coming into that process is going to be directly affected by what's going on in the outside world. That gives you a tool for evaluating whether the transformation is delivering what you thought it was going to at the start. It gives you a tool as well for thinking about the right phasing of these different initiatives. So actually you might not see the benefit if all of your early transformation activity are just pushing backlogs further and further down the process. You're not going to see any actual benefit on business metrics until right at the very end of that process. There might be a different sequencing of introducing those changes to those modules that the digital twin can help reveal. And then where you move to ultimately is the digital twin is used in BAU. So it's being used to continuously provide that predictive forward-looking view of, is this process fit for the changing world in which is now operating? So as technology changes, as the macroeconomic environment changes, as you merge and acquire, as you launch new products, all these things have downstream impact on processes. And rather than wait 5 years and come back and do another big transformation exercise, digital twin takes you into the world of, on a daily basis, if you so wish, you can continue to check that your process is fit for purpose and delivering the value to the business that it needs to.
Gotcha. So what happens in the case where process mining can't discover the as-is process? For example, our as-is process is either so manual, or there are parts of the process where we just can't get the right data or good data, clean data to be able to support that. And we've decided, okay, either we don't have this information, or we're going to look at revamping this entire module, this other part of the process, to some greenfield solution. So obviously we won't have any data because the understanding of that part of that module may change completely in terms of how we process the ins and the outs from that part of the process. So how do you model those kind of environments where either there's poor data or bad data, missing data, or it's a completely greenfield environment?
Yeah. So yeah, you're absolutely right. And philosophically, if you're an organization, and we meet these organizations where the as is processes is actually not interesting for various reasons, typically because of this idea that there is a green field, you are going to fundamentally change that process or a set of processes. A classic sort of use case where this crops up for us is ERP transformation. So where an organization is, shifting from an on-premise to a cloud ERP solution, they know that all of the processes that go through that ERP are going to change. And so actually having an understanding of the as is, if you've missed that boat, if you never had a good understanding of the as is, you didn't do your process mining, you didn't have a process for mapping those processes and understanding them in that way. Now's an opportunity actually just to just think about what the to be process is. And so again, we have these customers using Silico at this point for design of what those optimal to be processes are. And then rather than being in a world in which we have this sort of very qualitative description of what those processes are, maintained in the organization, perhaps a set of maps, they have an opportunity to sort of jump straight to having a digital twin of those processes. So you build the digital twin for the purpose of designing what the optimal to be, what the optimal shape of this implementation is going, this greenfield implementation is going to look like. And then when they get there and when it's implemented, they now have process maps and they have the data wired up to ensure that they have this living predictive view of that process going forward. So it's absolutely not a hard requirement for an organization to work with process simulation that they've done process mining. It's not even a hard requirement that they've already got their processes mapped out. Those two things will make life easier to get to a starting point. But we are seeing organizations who realize that if this is a direction of travel they want to go in, if ultimately what they want is to have a digital twin of the process, they can jump straight there and they can start at that point. They can start building these process descriptions in a tool like Silico rather than having them in process maps and converting those over and doing the work to turn that into a digital twin.
So what's we talked a lot about the concepts behind this, and we've talked a little bit more about the practical applications of it. What's the effort? What's the lift for an organization who says, that sounds pretty cool. I mean, we have this process mining program that we're working on now. We're getting the data out of it. But what's the jump going between, having the data through process mining to actually having this digital twin? Because it sounds like it's a lot of effort to get between one angle to get this whole digital twin up and running so that we can do this kind of modeling exercise.
Yes. So we've actually bridged that gap technologically. So what Silico has is a set of integrations into process mining tools to actually take the structures of the simulations and the key parameters directly from the process mining platform of choice of our customers. So the time to value, the time from process mining done, picture of the process as it is today, to forward-looking simulation should be less than a week for a typical customer. We can get them to that point. The point at which we then start to connect these things together, and where there are other data that needs to be used to enrich the digital twin, that's where the next phase of the journey starts. So that initial value, that piece is really, really quick. And single process where you're already at that point, you've got a BPMN definition. We can import that. We can automatically generate simulation on that basis. You've already done process mining. Similar story, that also gives them the numbers to the simulation that are needed to be able to start doing this analysis. And then from there, the journey is how and where do you want to grow that? So it's a really small additional step for someone who's already on that journey, who's already got their processes well mapped or well mined. Mm-hmm. And then we're trying to take them further. We're trying to take them closer to the ultimate business value. Like, how do you change these processes? And what's the ROI and what's the business case for changing them in all the myriad possible ways we could change a process, whether that's technology change, people change, automation, and all the other possibilities that are out there.
So you mentioned something too that I also wanted to key in on. You mentioned a BPM kind of integration or hop. So we've talked a lot about process mining, feeding the data in. What about BPM workflows?
What happened to us, and the reason we kind of got here almost, our early customers kept just sending us process maps. They kept sending us, BPMN files from all the sort of tools out there that your listeners will be familiar with. And we were originally manually converting these into simulation models. And what we realized as the simulation framework, as our sort of mathematical language got enriched to account for all of the language of something like a BPMN standard, was that, hey, actually, this is something we could automate. And so we went down that path, and we built a direct converter, so you can upload a file, a BPM file, and that could be your as is, or that could be your to be. You can render that, at the click of a button as a simulation, and then you can start to do all of this analysis. You can start changing that process structure. You can start changing the numbers flowing through that process structure and output all of those metrics that you're interested in.
So it sounds like you have a bunch of ways to get the information in, whether it's from discovering it through process mining to pulling it in through a BPM tool, export. So there's ways to be able to create these simulations in say, lower effort ways, but then to get that benefit of understanding, now I have a simulation that I can tweak to find a more optimal process for our organization and to affect those metrics in a positive way.
That's right. Yeah, exactly right. I always think that when we talk to a customer who's sort of exploring this capability, I sort of say almost the right way to frame this, the right way to think about process simulation is, what are the questions you'd like to be able to ask about your transformation? What are those things that you want to be able to explore? Is it you're evaluating different ways of automating parts of a process? Is it you're evaluating the correct way to implement a technology change? Is it a question about people and workforce? Once we know what those questions are, what's required in the digital twin, the scope of it to answer that question is determined by what question you're trying to answer. And then from there, what we've been doing as a technology vendor is making it as easy as possible for us to get that information into Silico to be able to answer those questions for our customers in as short a time span as possible. So the point of value for a customer is when they have an answer to one of those questions that they're trying to answer. And we're trying to make it really easy for you. If you've done BPM, if you've done process mining, if you have, data that are sat in enterprise systems, or if you just have a blank sheet of paper, those are all possibilities for starting to work with us, and we can take you to the answers to those questions.
That makes a lot of sense. So kind of switching gears on you, if I were to look at your bedside table, what book would I find there that you're reading right now?
Gosh, I'm actually reading a biography of Napoleon at the moment.
Oh, interesting.
Which is in anticipation of, there's a film coming out in November, I think, a Ridley Scott film about Napoleon. And so I was kind of eagerly anticipating the film. So I thought I'd like to do the background reading first and understand a bit more about the man before I see the film.
Interesting. Is that, did you typically read that, or is there any genres that you generally kind of gravitate towards?
I read everything. I like biographies. Biography is something I've got more into recently, but I read philosophy. Occasionally, I still turn to economics as well. I read novels. I read all sorts of things. It's finding the time these days that's the hard part. There's too many books I want to read and not enough time. Yeah.
I totally understand that. Well, John, it was really good talking with you today. I appreciate the way you are able to open up the concept of digital twin and help us understand how we can go from process mining or BPM data into this concept that has been around for a while, but it's been sort of elusive for organizations, and understanding where we can get to really get this business modeling active so you can really take your business to the next level. So I appreciate you kind of joining us today and talking through this.
My pleasure. I've had fun. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.